Let's dial in some great tones at the source. This is a new episode in our series on the full production process, start to finish. This is step 4, setup and sound check. We're going to talk about how to capture great tones at the source, because that's where it all starts. Like what goes into a great source tone, how to set up your instruments, where to put the mics, which mics to choose, all of that. So this is basically the day when the band arrives at the studio and does the setup. So if you think about your own home studio situation, I know you're not going to a studio if you record yourself, but think about it that way. We've covered the foundation, the arrangement, the writing, and all of that. You've practiced your song, you've fine-tuned it, you did a demo, we went through a demo process, you did full pre-production, you got the gear you needed for the project. Now you and the songs and the gear, everything's prepared for the actual session, and now you basically arrive at the studio fully prepared, ready to go and track the whole thing. So this is day 1 at the studio. And in a professional studio situation, this would be where the engineers would, pick the mics, set up the drums, set up the guitars, pick the guitar amps, put the mics in the right spots, and do all those things, move the mics and all that until it sounds as close as possible to a finished thing. This has nothing to do with mixing yet. This is capturing it right at the source. This is very, very important. It's one of those things that pros never skip, because it's not like the way many DIY artists do, that you just plug in a guitar real quick, record something, and then you're figuring out the tone later in the mix. This is not what happens at a professional studio. And I would highly recommend you have the same kind of approach and mindset when you go into your own recording sessions at home. The better the source tone is, the easier your life's going to be in the mix. You're not going to fight an uphill battle. The more fun you're going to have, the less back and forth there's going to be. And the result, the definition of done of this step, is basically something that you've recorded, that when it's a sound check recording, not the final takes yet, but like something where you did the sound check, you recorded everything, and then if you hit play and you just put up the faders and you don't do any mixing, no plugins at all, it should sound pretty cool with just volume balances. That's kind of the goal, the definition of done for this project, for this process. And if you've done it correctly, the next step would then be to just focus on your actual performances, track the takes, and you don't have to worry about the gear for a moment anymore. You just play and then you take it to the mix. So let's dive in. I am Benedikt Hein. That's my name. I'm a mixing engineer. I run a mixing studio located in the Bavarian Forest in Germany, very close to the national park. Currently, we got like minus 13 outside, so it's winter here. It's nice and beautiful. I run a mixing studio here. I've been doing that for, 18 years, I think, at this point. I always mix it up, but it's been more than 50, not yet 20. And I've been doing full production for quite a while. Then I transitioned to mixing only. I am working now with another engineer here at my studio, Thomas, who is doing a lot of work here with me. We mix a ton of songs every single year. And a couple of years ago, we started the Self-Recording Band, this coaching platform that this podcast belongs to, where we help DIY artists, self-recording bands and musicians make better recordings from their home studios and jam spaces. So if that is you, if you want to improve your recordings and you do it by yourself, you're in the right place. We share all the insights and learnings and lessons from all those productions at our studios here on this podcast and inside of our coaching program, where we work directly with artists. And of course, part of that team is not just Thomas and not just myself. It's also my beautiful, wonderful, phenomenal co-host, Manel Espinosa Berenguer. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello, Benedikt. For you guys who don't know me, I'm Manel Espinosa, and I'm a mixing engineer and music producer from Spain, from Alicante. Here in Alicante, people freak out when we are below 0 degrees. So, yeah, it's much warmer than Benedikt's. But yeah, as I always say, I'm happy to help artists bring their demos into finished professional songs through a very lovely process.
I love that. Awesome. Yeah. So I'm primarily mixing. Manel is primarily producing, or a full stack producer. Let's see what we can talk about in this episode today. I'm before. Sorry for the banter. We started getting quicker into the episodes, but today I wanna quickly chat about something before we do that. Forgive me. I know this is one of those things where we're gonna get hate comments on YouTube. I don't care. I want to talk to Manel sometimes about other things too. We talked about it before we started this episode. We're in very different spots today because your back is hurting, and I feel pretty good today because I got a run in actually for the first time in a long time today. Are you still like I wanted to ask before we did the episode, but I didn't get to it. Do you still like exercise despite the back pain you're facing?
Yes. I think it's crucial to continue moving even if you feel some pain, because I think that the problem that I have, which is a herniation of the disc, it's more like a systematic problem, like a general problem. So like just not moving is not an option. So yeah, I've been dealing with this for almost 2 years. And yeah, it's mentally, it's kind of difficult because it's a pain that is present in many ways, like especially when sitting. But yeah, what can we do? Just I'm just trying hard to try to get better and overcome this problem. So
yeah. Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that. But it's also a good reminder maybe for our audience to leave their seats every once in a while and just move, because I know that a lot of us are, cavemen sitting in our dark cave all day, not moving. And so maybe get up every once in a while and do a little bit of exercise in between. Yeah. I've been doing that a lot, as you know, but like longer listeners of the podcast, they will know that I was a very passionate runner and like did some, running competitions and marathons and ultra marathons and stuff like that. But I stopped doing that for a while and focused more on like weightlifting and getting stronger because that was always a weakness of mine, literally. And I was like more prone to injury and stuff. But now I got back into or I'm getting back into running and do kind of a mix of both. And I just noticed today for the first time in quite a while that I got a run in. It did not just lift. And I immediately got reminded of how good it just feels to spend time outside, run in the sun, even if it was super cold, but it was awesome, like crisp, fresh air, movement, blood flowing everywhere. And so I'm looking forward to this year where I'm going to combine the two. And I think it's going to make everything better. Also, my work at the studio. I remember that the times that I was exercising the most, I also was most excited about work, and the kind of balance is really important. And when I stop doing that or just do one type of exercise for a long time, I just feel worse. So yeah, nothing to do with audio directly, but I think it might be a good reminder for some people to do that. I think it directly affects your work and your creativity and everything. And I've been talking to many peers about this. It's the older we get, especially, the more important I think this gets. So yeah.
Agree.
Okay, cool. Now, to the topic. We got some audio examples today as well. I hope they are working correctly. You can hear all those. Let's dive in. So, recording setup, sound check. I want to start by saying that this part of the process is difficult for home recording people for one specific reason. And that is, if you book a studio session and you have a clear, outcome, like a clear goal, you've booked, to record a record, like an album or an EP, or maybe just a single or a couple or whatever, but you have a clear outcome and you will do whatever it takes. The engineers at the studio will do whatever it takes to set everything up perfectly, and it's kind of worth it because, you invested money into it, you showed up at the studio, you want to get the best results, so of course you're going to do whatever is required to get best possible sounds. If you do it at home, obviously you also want best possible results, but the difficult thing here is, for those of you who don't batch their recordings, who don't record a full album and then they go to writing again and touring or whatever, for those of you who record regularly, which is a lot of people, most people maybe these days, where you have a consistent release schedule, maybe you release a song once a month, or maybe it's just for fun that you just constantly record your music, it becomes difficult because it gets very tedious and time-consuming and also expensive to do a proper setup every single time you record something, right? So setup means not just the effort to put the mic in the right spots and all that, but like setting up the instruments, for example. If you record a full album and you buy new drum skins and you tune them and you go through the whole tedious, time-consuming process of setting a drum kit up properly, you do that once and you track the album with it, and that's good. But if you record a song every couple of weeks, then the skins will get old, the tuning will be off and all that, and you'll have to do that all the time. You'll have to maintain the drum kit, and it quickly becomes this like difficult thing that you're likely going to skip just because you don't want to do that every single time, or just even putting on new strings constantly on your guitars. I mean, the The really serious self-recording musicians, the bigger artists and who do that, they definitely do that, and they make sure that they have new strings and they have everything set up correctly. But for the hobbyists, I can see how they say, well, I'm not going to change my strings like 3 times a week on the bass and spend $20 every time, and then I'm going to set up my drums every time and all that. So I just want to know, I just want you to know that I hear you. Nevertheless, if you want the best possible result, it is still kind of required. So maybe you can think about a way to get the most out of every setup that you do when it comes to instrument setups, and batch as much as possible. Even if you release regularly, maybe you can record a couple of songs at once, at least on drums, for example, if you do real drums, and then do the rest like over a longer period of time. Maybe you can also batch guitar recording sessions. Maybe you do a lot of writing where it doesn't matter if you have the old strings on it, but then every once in a while you do a longer recording session. Or you just find a way to constantly maintain your stuff. But if you're one of those people who just skip it because it's tedious, time-consuming, and it costs money, you gotta just accept the fact that the results are gonna be a compromise. It is just part of making a record or making great sounding recordings to have that stuff dialed in. But we're going to get to what exactly is required, and then you can make your own decision. Just know if you skip it, there is always going to be a compromise. But I hear you that it likely is a compromise, especially for hobbyists, because of the effort that goes in. Up to you to decide if that's worth it to you or not. So, but let's start somewhere else. Let's start with a topic that is top of mind for you right now, Manel. Let's start with acoustics. So this is not where you build a room, whatever, you're already like you're close to the recording session. But this is where you make the most out of the acoustics that you have. Meaning, you put the instrument or yourself for the vocal recording, whatever you have, in the ideal best spot in the room, basically. And then you do whatever you can to mitigate any kind of negative effects of the room, or to embrace the cool things about your room. Like you just play and interact with the room in the best possible way when you set up. So you don't just sit there because you always sit there and you set up a mic. You make an intentional decision of like, where am I going to record these vocals or this guitar? Where am I going to put the mic? And it makes a big difference. So in your case, Manel, you're just setting up a new room. You moved. And part of the challenge is to find a good spot or create a good spot where you can record vocals or acoustic guitars, something like that. And you've already noticed in the now pretty much untreated room that it is a bit problematic right now compared to what you had before. Maybe I don't know if it's a bigger room probably than you had before.
Not
really.
It's weird because before I was living in a studio, like it was so everything was in one room. So in total it was bigger, but it was very irregular.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a room which is only the studio, the one you can see here. But it's pretty much a square, so it's very different.
Yeah, and less stuff in there probably, right? Like just yeah. So we won't get into studio builds. This is an entirely different topic. Like we have topics on episodes. We have episodes on this topic on acoustics. With, for example, Jesko Lohan that we had on as a guest, who's an amazing acoustician, studio designer, and other episodes on that topic too. So if you're about to build a room, optimize your room, go there and listen to those. But if you already have a room and you want to make the most out of what you have, here's a couple of things you can do. First of all, know that that it makes a difference where you set up your microphone and where you set up the sound source, which could be you if it's vocals, or it could be an acoustic guitar, it could be a guitar amp, anything recorded with a mic. It makes a difference. So not just the treatment, the absorbers, but where in the room you actually are. And you can easily test this. The best thing to do, and I've done this with a couple of coaching students in the past, which was always fascinating to hear the results, is you can just grab a microphone, a handheld microphone if you have, or any really, and you just talk into it and record yourself while you talk into it, and you just walk around the room and you keep talking and you say out loud where you are in the room. So you move around and you say like, now I'm in front of my computer, I'm in my sitting position here, and now I stand up, and now I get back to the rear wall, and now I'm on the right side close to the wall, and now on the left side, and so on and so forth. And you just do that, and then afterwards you listen back and you pay attention to how the sound changes when you move around. And you'll find spots in most rooms that sound more roomy, others that sound more dead. You find some that are brighter, others might sound a little more boxy, boomy. You can do louder shouts or screams if that's your thing. You can sing loudly or quietly, whatever you do, like do a couple of different things in each spot. and pay attention to what it sounds like. You'll find, for example, that in corners, generally there's more bass and low end buildup. Close to the walls, you'll find a bit of low end buildup. In the middle of the room, in many rooms, like square or rectangular rooms, you'll find there's spots where it sounds a little thinner, where there's more cancellation of the low end happening. Maybe not so much with voice, but if you record a bass with a bass amp, for example, or an upright bass, or if you record an acoustic guitar where you want a full low end, it might become more noticeable. With drums especially, like a kick drum in the middle of the room will sound drastically different compared to the corner of a room. So pay attention to the low end, pay attention to how roomy it sounds, and pay attention to any like obvious echoes, flutter sounds, or anything that sounds almost like the top end of a bad MP3, the kind of weird of phasey top end, that can happen. Might be harder to hear if you're inexperienced, but it could be that the reflections from the walls are interfering with your direct sound. They blend and mix together, and they create what's called comb filtering. So you're filtering out some parts of your frequency spectrum, and you're boosting other parts. It's going to be a mix of the direct sound plus the reflections, and it's going to alter the sound you record. And so, long story short, you want to find a good spot, first of all, that sounds balanced and good to you, not too boomy, not too bright, not too roomy, no obvious weird echoes and flutters. And so that's where you start. If there's no such place, you start with whatever is the best. And then what you should do as a first step is remove early reflections or get them out of the direct sound as much as possible. So a good thing to do is, for example, for vocals, put something against the wall. If you don't have real absorbers, a mattress can do, or maybe a thick curtain or something. But the thicker, the better. Curtains and stuff like that are kind of a okay solution, but better. Thicker absorbers are better. Something against the wall, and then you stand with your back against that absorber and you sing into the room. So that way, the mic is facing the dead thing behind you. You are singing into the mic. The reflections from the wall behind you are being absorbed. They're not bouncing back into the mic. And whatever reflections there are from the rest of the room will be arriving at the back of the mic that is less sensitive. And there will be a time delay between those reflections and the direct sound, which means if there is any room sound, our brain knows it as room sound. And then you can make a decision if that's intentional or not, if that bothers you or if it sounds cool. But it's not going to blend directly with the sound that comes out of your mouth into the mic. Whereas if you stand in front of a wall that is untreated, the reflections will arrive at the microphone almost at the same time as your direct sound, which then is so close together that our brain doesn't realize it's room sound. It just becomes this blend between the two, and then it interferes and changes your sound. And so get rid of the early reflections. The absorber behind the sound source is always a good starting point. So I'm not a big fan of the mic screens behind the microphone. They can be a solution for very problematic situations. It's better than nothing in many cases, but they also create reflections, and it's the wrong approach because the absorber should be behind the sound source. And I've tested this many times myself here. I was doing the same test with people on a call, for example, a coaching call, holding a microphone, going over to my wall, standing in front of one of the absorbers, and then talking, and immediately got a lot quieter. The echo got a lot quieter, the room reverb. And if I turn around and face the absorber so that the mic points into the room, it immediately gets roomier. So the absorber behind the source is usually where you want to start with. So that's one thing. And that same is true for guitar amps and other things. You can put a guitar amp against the wall and have an absorber behind the amp. Start there. An absorber can really be a thick mattress, can be thick curtains, ideally a real absorber, but play around with that. Just do whatever you can. And then, of course, if you want to build a proper room or a proper acoustic treatment, and for that we have other episodes. But this is where I would start with. And with drums or anything louder, more percussive, more low end, there's a cool test you can do, which I often do when I walk into new studios that I've never worked in, which is the floor tom test, which is you grab a bassy instrument like a floor tom, you hold it in your hand and you hit it, and you walk around the room hitting that tom. And then you listen to where is like the low end really boomy and big and almost too much. And then there will be spots where it's really thin and canceling out and you almost don't hear any low end. And then there will be a spot where it's tight and controlled but still full. And you can make a decision where you want to actually then set up the drum kit. So if you've never done that in your room, try that. Walk around with the floor tom. It looks very stupid if you do, but walk around, hit the tom while you're walking around the room, and then pay attention to how the low end builds up and where it sounds the way you want it to sound. So that's my take on the acoustics. It's just an important part of the setup to start in a good spot and not sabotage yourself from the beginning with the wrong spot in the room. I want to know, Manel, in your old studio, studio, you didn't have that much room to move, but have you ever experimented with different positions for like an acoustic guitar or vocals? And if so, did you notice a difference, or was it one of those rooms where everything's so close together that it's almost the same? Like, what was your experience there?
I had these big absorbers that I still have, and normally when I was like mixing or working on, recording guitars or whatever, they were right behind the desk. Mm-hmm. But when someone was coming to record vocals, I would take those and I would place the vocalist with the acoustic panels behind, and the vocalist will sing into the room, which was quite long. It was like narrow but long because there was a corridor and stuff. So the sound was great. Like we couldn't hear any early reflections whatsoever. With the guitar, it was a bit different because normally I was the one recording myself. So I had no options. Like I had to just record the acoustic guitars looking at the screen, looking at the desk. But I never found problems either way. So that's the way I found it was the best for my room at the time. But like right now, I still have to do a lot of treatment in this room. But if I had to record vocals, I would use the same approach. I would probably take both panels and move like the back of the room, put them kind of close to one of the walls probably, and have the singer sing into the part of the room which is as far away as possible. That's what I would try first, but I guess we would have to experiment with that and see what sounds better, because like I think it's crucial, because if you don't have the right vocal sound, if you have like a lot of the room in your vocals, it's never like you're done. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yep. It's one of those things where, it is what it is. It is going to be part of the recording. There's no undoing. I know there are tools to remove room sound, whatever, but it's always a compromise. And it's like, you're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops and do a lot of things to make it usable, versus just having something that sounds awesome without having to do that, which will always result in clearer, better results. So it is one of those things that is important because you cannot change it after the fact.
And well, I think that, at least in my opinion, it's not that difficult to like fix it, especially for vocals. Maybe for drums it gets a little bit more complex because it's way louder and stuff and whatever, but I have no experience doing that in my own room. So, but with vocals, if you know how it works, and you just have to build a couple of big panels, and you're probably good with that. I mean, it depends on the room, I guess, because maybe in a super little small room, maybe that doesn't work either way. But yeah, as long as you have a little bit of space, if you can cover the closest wall and then sing into the one that's far away, I think you've got good chances of having a good sound.
Yeah, sometimes this is one of those cases where little things can make a big difference. Like I said, you don't have to start, like many people get stuck here and they think they have to build a really crazy room now, but you can do one step at a time and do little improvements, and sometimes those little things are enough to make it work. I've made records in like really bad, really weird spots, and it worked with a little bit of creativity and effort there. And exactly, like minimum viable dose. Start with something simple, and then you can always improve from there. But many jam spaces can be turned into something that works for the recording.
And I also have to say, now that I think about it, that before building the absorbers, what I would do is I would take a mattress, like a, how do you call it, inflatable mattress?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would put it on the wall, and I would cover the mattress with like, with
Fabric?
fabric and covers and stuff like that, with as much stuff as I had in my flat. And then the same approach. The singer would have the mattress behind them against the wall, and then she would sing into the room, and the result was good. Anyways, it doesn't look as professional or whatever, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting you say with the inflatable mattress, because, I mean, it worked, and it was probably more the covers than the mattress in this case then, because I think if you have a rubber mattress with air inside of it, it's still going to be kind of a hard surface. The air can't pass through. So when we talk about absorbers, we talk about dense but soft like material where air with a sound can get trapped in and be absorbed, whereas like a rubber with like an inflatable thing will still bounce the sound back, into the room. But it's better than nothing, better than a hard wall, and especially if you cover it with a lot of stuff. So,
yeah, I think it was a good support for the stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Cool. Yeah. So, that's where it starts. And we're not talking about building mix rooms here. This is about the acoustics and the recording session and the recording situation, right? Okay. Cool. So, and then for those of you who are listening who are inside of our coaching community and program, the Self-Recording Syndicate, you have access to a couple resources there. We have an action plan or a playbook on room acoustics. We have guest workshops. One of our members even documented his entire studio build, a professional studio build that he did, and documented it all for the community. So inside there, you got a couple of really cool resources. There's also a live recording setup guide with like where you put absorbers and stuff in the room and how you position your instruments if you record a live band. So that might be one reason to join the coaching. But it's obviously something we can help people with. The next step, now that you know where you set up your stuff, is the actual instrument setup. And I kind of talked about it already at the beginning here. This just means make sure that the instrument is set up correctly, that your guitars are, that the intonation, the truss rod, the action, all of those things you can adjust on a guitar, that they are spot on so that the instrument plays well, feels well, and sounds good. It makes a big, big difference. You don't want any unintentional like fret buzz. You don't want weird intonation issues, of course, all those things. And you want to pick the right strings and the right string gauges, the right string material. Different brands make a difference. It really makes a difference, a lot, like a big, big difference, actually. And just make sure your guitar is set up correctly. Every single, bigger record, every record that there's always the exception, I know, and people will tell me an exception, but 99% of like records that people love that have been made professionally, there is a guitar tech or someone who knows what they're doing in that regard, and they set up guitars properly. It's an intentional choice to choose a certain type of strings and gauge and setup and all that. We even have also inside of our program, of our coaching, we have a full course, a full masterclass with Diego Casillas, who's a great guitar tech, who's worked with like big artists, and he has done a full masterclass course on how to set up guitars and all those things I just mentioned. And you can do a lot of that, all of it actually yourself. It's one of those things where a lot of artists say, well, I don't want to take the guitar to the shop every time. And it's like, you don't have to do that. It's you spend like half an hour or maybe like, let's say 2 hours learning that stuff and then practicing a little bit. And you'll be able to do that every single time yourself. It's not rocket science. It's really not that hard. There's a difference between really good guitar techs and us, like who do it every once in a while, but you can get great results, and you can definitely learn it within a couple of hours to be good enough to do a good job at that every single time you record or you play live, and just maintaining your instruments in general. So I highly recommend people learn this. And again, if you're inside of our coaching, you have a full resource that walks you through all of this. Same is true with drums. If you have old drum skins, old cracked cymbals, of course, or stuff like that, that's not good, no bueno, unless it's intentional. But but like the sound of a drum is 90% coming from the drum head, the drum skin, and not from the shell. So even an old, cheap drum set, unless, like, as long as the shells are still round and not, like, weirdly shaped for whatever reason and broken, like, as long as they're still round and nothing's broken, just putting on the right drum skin, tuning it properly and all that will turn it into something that sounds decent and can be recorded. So the drums themselves have a surprisingly low influence on how it sounds compared to what the drum skins do. So new drum skins, the right tuning, the right drum skins, single ply, double ply, coated, clear, all those decisions, different brands, different types of, dampening and all that makes a huge difference. So another area that is absolutely worth studying and getting into. And if you don't record real drums, it is still worth learning that stuff, because if you program and you deal with MIDI drums, you can either just pick a preset hoping for the best and something you like without really being intentional, and it can work, but it's not really intentional and there might be a better choice. But if you know how different drum materials sound, different shell materials, different types of skins, different types of cymbals, shell sizes, and all of that, then you can intentionally pick and choose samples inside of your sampler. You can pick different drums, you can choose different drum sizes, you can tune and manipulate the drums up and down, you can reduce the sustain, increase the sustain, manipulate the attack, and there's all kinds of parameters that a lot of people never use inside of their samplers. And if you know how drum setup works and why drums sound a certain way, then you can do that drum setup and engineering part of it, or drum tech part of it, even in the digital world, which makes a big difference. And not only will it sound better, it objectively, it will ensure that you have a unique sound that sounds like you and not like everyone else, versus like picking a preset that 180,000 other people have also used on their record. So drum setup is a big thing, and we got both a drum gear guide and a guitar gear guide inside of our coaching as a resource for people. So that where we go through different materials, different types of stuff, and what that sounds like, so you can be intentional about this. But yeah, definitely learn about that stuff. And it's way too much to go into a lot of detail here on a podcast, but just know that it makes a difference. And again, start with the minimum, effective dose there. Just learn single ply versus double ply heads, learn basic drum tuning and how to put them on correctly, when to change them, when to listen, when to hear that they're actually getting dull, for example. And I would always also recommend that once you're done with the sound check of the drums and you're recording real drums, record some samples of the perfect setup that you now have that you really like, just some individual hits, so that during the session you can compare to where you started and notice if things got duller, if the tuning changed, when the stick attack is not there anymore and things get dull or weird, it might be time to change the heads again, things like that. So just have some reference point in comparison. And I promise you, when you've done that for the first time and you set up a drum kit correctly and you play it properly and you hear that in the room, it's a revelation. It's like most people are so stoked. Whenever I did drums for people on recordings and I did the drum setup for them, and they're not used to that because they have never played on a good setup like that, or very rarely in their jam spaces, they're always like, man, I wish my drums would sound like that every day, because it would be so much more fun to practice and play, and they just wouldn't stop playing just because it's so much fun to play on a really well set up kit. So it might be even worth it to maintain it to some degree, even for practicing, just because it's a lot more fun. It just sounds awesome. And if you're playing live, then same thing applies. So yeah, instrument setup, take this seriously. I don't know. There was a long monologue once again, but Manel, any thoughts on this? And there's a question actually in my notes that I need to ask you. 90% of what I've done at the studio was electric guitars, electric basses, and drums, where a lot of setup work was involved, and I'm fairly good at this. However, one thing that has happened not so often in my case is things like classical guitar, nylon strings, for example, Spanish guitar, classical guitar, stuff like that. I know you record quite a bit of that. It might be different. I know that I personally, from the little experience that I have, I always found that you can get away with a bit more there. Like if they're not brand new, sometimes I still feel like it can work, and it depends on the taste of the artist. Some acoustic guitars with steel strings, same thing. They might sound a little brittle and metallic when you just put them on, and they might need to be broken in a little bit. And it's a taste thing. Sometimes I like the clear sound. Sometimes they sound better after a couple of hours of playing. But I want to hear your thought on acoustic guitar setup, because that's a whole different thing. You have less options to do actually, and then maybe the whole new strings thing is a little different there. But you're probably a better expert at that than I am.
Do you mean classical guitar?
Yeah, or anything acoustic. Any thoughts on acoustic guitars, but specifically classical guitar, because that's the one where I recorded the least.
Okay, I don't have any particular thoughts that are different than in acoustic guitars. Like it depends on the song, on the genre. Like it's not the same for someone who wants to play flamenco. That's gonna be very rhythmic. They probably need a brighter sound, but it really depends. You also have to take care of your nails, like a lot. And some people when I used to be a classical guitar player, and I happen to have good nails, but some people broke their nails all the time, and they need to use some products to like get them in shape because it's they cannot play without nails, right? So yeah, I don't think there's anything too different comparing it to acoustic guitar. The thing that I think it's very important to think about when playing acoustic guitar is the pick.
Mm-hmm.
Also with electric guitar, of course, but I think that with acoustic guitar, the pick is like an EQ, and it really changes the sound of the guitar. It's not the same if you use like just 3 like this.
Mm-hmm.
Not very normal in acoustic guitar, but anyways.
Yeah.
Or something that's thinner, like it totally changes the sound. So especially when you are going to record in the studio, you should get yourself a good set of different picks. Even though you're used to maybe 1 or 2 or whatever, but you should have a repertoire of different EQs, you know what I mean?
Different picks, yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, totally. It's a good thing you mentioned that. Picks, same for electric guitar, a variety of different picks, shapes, sizes, materials. Definitely have that ready because different parts might require a different pick. We covered that in the gear episode, so I don't want to get into that too much. But like, I always had different picks there because one part might need a little more attack, another one might give you some squealing sounds, and with a different pick they go away, and like,
Yeah.
And classical guitar, like acoustic guitar, same thing. But do you agree generally that, like, in many cases, there is an exception to the new strings kind of rule? With electrics, there's rarely an exception because you can always make it darker. It's almost never worse. But with acoustic guitar, sometimes I feel, depending on the project, the taste, the song, and all that, sometimes I feel strings that are broken in a little bit can be better for some projects. So I don't always use brand new strings on acoustics.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be too much. But again, as you said, it depends on the context, on the song, on many, many things. I feel that acoustic guitar is a way more sensitive instrument compared to the electric guitar. So that, the way you play, of course, in electric guitar, it has influence if you have a strong attack, right? But I think that with acoustic guitar, those things make a bigger difference. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, cool. So take the setup seriously. That's the bottom line here. And we gave you a couple pointers already, but I cannot give a recommendation on precise drum skins or guitar strings or anything like that, because that is totally, I would need to hear your songs and then the vision that you have and what you're going for, the tuning and all those things. But it's absolutely necessary actually to learn that kind of stuff. And if you do it right, I know it sounds tedious, but if you do it right, everything that comes afterwards will be a lot easier. But yeah, enough of the setup. Now, next thing, and this is where audio examples will come in. This is the mic placement. Now, let's say you have found the best spot in the room, you've done what you can to optimize it, you've set up your instruments so that it sounds awesome there, so just standing in the room listening to the instrument is the best you can do. Now you put a mic in front of it. Mic positioning matters more than mic choice. This is something that I tell people all the time, and you can easily test this if you take 2 different microphones, and you will find you'll be able to create a situation where the mic choice is a drastic difference compared to the precision, whatever. But in general, if you pick 2 mics, and especially 2 dynamics or 2 condenser mics, 2 mics of the similar kind sort of, and you put them in the same spot, you'll hear a difference based on the sound of the microphone. But now use the same mic and move it a couple of inches or just centimeters, just a little bit back and forth, change the angle, change the distance to the source. You're going to hear a drastic difference. This is like your first stage of EQ almost, where if you record a guitar cap and you just move it like this far, if you're watching on YouTube, like just a little bit closer to the center of the cone or of the speaker or closer to the edge of it, massive difference. So before you upgrade your mics, before you look into buying more expensive mics, figure out what your current mics can actually do, because they can do a lot. Same with drums. Positioning them as an XY on overheads or an AB, drastic difference in many ways. Getting closer to cymbals or further away, big difference. Closer to a drum, the angle that you have, big difference. But especially with guitar cabs or also vocals, the distance to it, the angle you have, massive difference. So just to give you a couple of examples, for vocals, if you're struggling with sibilance, for example, try not doing what I just do, which is having the mic pointing from below me upwards to my mouth. This is what I'm doing right now, just for different reasons here for the podcast setup, but I'm also avoiding to talk directly into it. But like if you have it like that, then you're going to have a higher likelihood of sibilance. If you put the mic higher and angle it down towards your mouth, you're going to avoid a lot of the sibilance, because the air, when you make an S sound, tends to move down out of your mouth and down to the ground. And if the membrane, the capsule of the microphone is below your mouth, you're going to have that burst of air going directly into the microphone, and it causes the sibilant sound. Same with plosives. And if you have it higher above and aiming down, the air will go through below the mic, and you won't have those problems as much. If you go, and you can test this, right, you can hear it right now probably on this podcast. I don't know if the processing completely undoes that. I don't know. Let's try. But like, if I go really close to the mic, you should hear more low end and like a fuller, boomier sound. If I go further away like this, it should sound thinner, quieter also, but also thinner with less low end. So there is a difference, not just in how roomy it is and how how close it sounds, but also the drastic EQ change just based on the distance to the mic, and then sibilance and stuff like that. So this is one thing. Yeah, microphone positioning just matters a lot, and a lot of people just don't spend enough time doing that. If you've ever been in a professional studio situation, you'll see engineers move mics around a lot, actually, to find the best spot for one mic. And then if you combine multiple mics, phase also becomes an issue, where you have to make sure that the mics work well together, that they add and they don't cancel, and they you don't get weird like phase problems, and all those things, like being intentional. And so don't just put a mic somewhere and start, move it around, learn what that does, figure out a good spot. And the more you do it, the quicker you get in the future, because you'll learn your go-to spots for certain things. It's not that you start over every single time. The more you do that, the more you get to know your setup, your room, your mic, and everything. So let's do some audio examples here, maybe. So Manel, I'm going to play 3 things. The first one is going to be, let's start with the more subtle ones and then go to the most drastic ones. So the first 2 examples are going to be drum examples. They're also not really that subtle, but we'll see. So drum examples. The first one is a kick drum. There's the same kick drum with the same microphone, but the microphone is in different positions. There's a couple of hits in one position, then the next position, then the next position. You're going to hear that. So let me know what you think is going on here, Manel. We're going to hit play. Hopefully you can hear this. Okay, so these were 3 different positions. You did hear there was a difference, right?
Yes.
Yes. What do you think is going on?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the last one was closer, for sure. And then the 1 and 2, maybe you were just getting it closer and closer, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So what happened was that the first one was kind of in the sound hole, or kind of a little bit into the drum, sort of a balance between like the beater and the outside of the drum. The second one was on the outside of the bass drums, like on the resonant head. So it's more of the wood and a little more of the room, and not so much of the beater attack. Mm-hmm. And then the last one was very far inside the drum, closer to the beater. So you had a lot of click sound and less of the room. So the closer you get to the beater, the more of the click attack you have, the more you go to. So if you move it back from the beater, you get less click and usually more low end. Then there will be a spot somewhere in the kick drum where the low end is the most. Sometimes it's 2/3 of the way where you have the biggest pressure. And then outside of the kick drum, there is less kick, more wood, more thump, more like what hits you in the chest. Not necessarily always more low end, but a different kind of low end. And oftentimes people combine the outside and the inside mic to get a good blend of the two. But it makes a big, big difference. And so this is just the same mic, moving it a little bit inside and outside of the drum. That was one example. The next one is going to be way harder, and I'm not going to make you answer this, Manel, because this is, I don't know if I would be able to answer it without knowing what was going on, but just notice that there is a difference. This is the most subtle one, and then we get to a really, really obvious one. So here's a snare drum. That's going to be a little more subtle.
Can I guess?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you're changing the angle of the
Correct.
microphone. Yeah, because sometimes it sounds more, to me, it sounds more skin than the edge. And sometimes it's more edge than skin.
You're right. And it gets tricky with snare because this is another side effect here that goes back to the foundation episode. The playing style matters a lot. So where you hit the drum and how you hit it has a big influence on it. So if I hit the drums differently on those different examples, it might kind of not undo, but change what happens. And it's not just the mic position. It's also, with the kick drum, it's pretty consistent. But with the snare drum, if I hit it slightly differently, it sounds completely different. So there's two things at play here. But you're correct. It starts out, if I remember correctly, hopefully it's not backwards, but it starts, as far as I know, it starts out with the mic pointing at a 45 degrees angle towards the center, sort of, where the stick is hitting. And then it gradually gets steeper and steeper and steeper and more towards the outside. And so, or the first one was really flat, actually. The second one was like 45 degrees. And then the last two were like steeper and steeper. And the way I perceive it is that the first one was pretty balanced between stick attack, body of the drum, and ring. Then the first one was like not. Yeah, I could say that. Maybe not balanced. It was a little thin, let's say that. Like, but this balance between ring and stick attack was there, but it was a little thin. The second one, the 45-degree angle, had more bottom to it, more body, and more, which is thicker, more foundation. Then the steeper you get towards the end, it's a little more snappy, because if you have a 90 degrees angle, that would be the extreme where the mic is pointing straight down, you'd have a snappy sound, because it's like the movement of the drum skin is the most accurate, because it's moving away and back to the mic. Like there's the most movement, the most pressure difference, if the mic is pointing straight at the head. So it's more snappy, but there's less bottom end, because what you get, the impact of the stick on the head is less pronounced, because you're not pointing at where the stick actually hits. And then you get more of the ring from the outside, because the outside of the drum is where a lot of the higher pitch ring is happening from the snare. So the more I move it to the outside with a steeper angle, it gets more snappy, but also you get a higher kind of overtone, ring tone, and you get less bottom end from the impact of the stick and the proximity effect the closer you get to it. So I'm not saying one is better or worse or whatever, but it's like, it just changes. And the way, it almost sounds like there's different snare tunings, because the overtones change how they sound based on the angle. So play around with that, experiment with that, find your own sweet spot, but just know that there's a difference. And now the third one, this is going to be super, super obvious. But just so you know, this is what I meant when I said sometimes or oftentimes the mic placement makes a bigger difference than the mic choice. So same microphone, same thing, moved maybe like this far. So I don't know what that is in inches, 10 centimeters max, not even. Okay, so listen to this. totally different. What happened?
What happened?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that the first one was closer to the center of the cone. The last one was far away.
Yep.
So that it gets less, I guess, less high frequencies.
Yep. The first one was pretty dead on, dead center on the speaker, very fizzy, very bright. The second one was more closer to the edge of the speaker and the cone, and it just sounds darker. And then anything in between, somewhere in between, will probably be your sweet spot. So, and you can combine two. You can put a dark mic on the outside, a bright mic on the inside. So you have two extremes, and they will have less in common, less phase problems. And then you can blend the two like an EQ almost to create your blend. The more similar the two are, the less it makes sense to actually blend them because they will be very similar anyways. And then also you get more phase problems. So I like to create a big difference if I'm blending two mics. But there are so many ways to do it. But even just it always starts with just one mic in a good spot usually. So just know that it makes a big difference. And this also applies if you're using amp sims, by the way, because amp sims have virtual microphones often that you can move just like that. And many people never do. But you can see how drastically different it is. And it is way more transparent to do it that way than to EQ it a bunch in the mix. I still EQ guitars, of course, based on the context of the mix. But the closer I can get it with just mic positioning and the amp settings, the better it is because guitars don't take EQ that well. The internal balance of the instrument changes, the overtones compared to the fundamental frequencies. And if you do it with just a good mic in the right spot, you'll have to do much less EQing in the mix, which will almost always result in better, more transparent results. So don't skip that. Don't just choose a preset. Be intentional about your mic choice and positioning. And also try different IRs. So not just the virtual mics if you're using amp sims, but you can also go through different IRs, impulse responses, with mics in different spots until you find one that you like, and be intentional about it. Just know that it's a big, big difference and that it matters where you put the mic and how the IR has been captured. And the more you know about this, the more intentional you can be. So if you see something like Mesa 4x12 SM57 center, you know this is going to be the sound of a Mesa cab in a 57, but fairly bright because it's in the center. If you see an IR that's called the same but edge, it could be that it's the edge of the dust cap or the edge of the speaker, which would be very dark. So by just looking at the names of the IRs, you can often tell if it's dark or bright if you have that kind of knowledge. So yeah. So those were some easy audio examples just to get the point across. And if you put effort into this, the mixing will be a lot easier, and you can build your foundation in a really good way during recording. Good. Next part, Manel. When you work with artists at the studio that you guide through the recording process, and especially vocalists, how important is it to set up, like during the sound check phase, to set up a good monitoring for them so they hear themselves properly and they feel good while they're singing? Is that something you pay attention to?
Yes, because some of them, they like to hear the reverb already and they like to hear something closer to the final result. So yeah, you really have to just ask them. I normally try to have everything ready when they come to the studio. And then I'll ask them, if I don't know them already, I'll ask them if they like more reverb or more instrumental. And yeah, so I mean, that's really important because you want them to give you their best and to be comfortable and stuff. So
Okay, yeah, totally. It's a very, very important part of the process. The monitoring, getting that right is part of the sound check process. Everybody needs to hear what they need to hear. Some people just want the click. Other people want certain backing tracks, scratch tracks. Other people want part of the arrangement, but not all of it. If you play live, it matters who needs to hear what. If you ever played live on stage, you know how much it matters what you hear on your monitors. Same is true for studio situations. And it directly affects your results because if you don't feel it while you're recording, you'll do a worse job recording, and the feel is not going to be there. It will just get better performance out of the artist or yourself if you hear properly what you want to hear. And like you said, reverb, a little bit of compression, something in the monitoring path that just makes it sound a bit more finished can just let you be more emotional, record better takes. Not everybody wants that, but some people definitely do. And so the goal is to figure out how to get effects like reverbs and delays or compressors on your monitoring without recording them if you don't want to commit to it right away. So you can route the audio through your DAW. You record dry, but you send some of the effects tracks in parallel back to your headphones. This is one way to do it. There are interfaces like the Apollos by Universal Audio or some other interfaces now that have built-in effects that you can use only for monitoring and not for recording or both. And so there's different ways, but don't just plug in a mic and record dry, or at least try to record with something in your monitoring chain and see how you like that. Record through plugins, record through something in your interface if it allows you to get that, to experiment with that. We had an amazing vocal mastery workshop. It was called Vocal Mastery. It was a vocal production, vocal recording workshop with Ken Lewis inside of our coaching program. Ken Lewis has worked on records for Alicia Keys, Taylor Swift, Eminem, like all kinds of insane projects. And he did a guest workshop for our coaching students and syndicate members, and also a podcast episode with us. But this vocal mastery workshop that he did, he put a lot of focus, a lot of effort on just the monitoring side of things. And he explained how he would drastically overcompress the monitoring path a lot of times, like the vocals in the monitors and the headphones, because that way, if the artist gets really loud in a part, they won't be scared all of a sudden or get quieter because their voice gets crazy loud in the headphones, and then they start to counteract that sort of, but they will sing loudly because the compressor will control it and not get crazy loud in the headphones. And the other way around too, if they sing quietly in an intimate part, they will still hear themselves because of the compression, because compression reduces dynamic range. And so the quiet stuff will be audible, the loud stuff won't get crazy, and they just do better performances. And you hear more details in your headphones. So he put a lot of emphasis on that and how important that was. So get the monitoring right for sure. A little side note here, little hack you can also do when you're struggling with intonation issues. You can also put please let me finish this before you hit to the comment section and type in your hate comment again. You can use auto-tune. There was the trigger word on a monitoring path in like some sort of auto-tune plugin in automatic mode, in live mode without latency, not to record through that and not to get a crazy auto-tune effect and all that, none of that, but just for the monitoring, because if you set it in a subtle way so that it corrects your vocals live as you record on your headphones, not recorded, just what you hear, this makes you intonate better in many cases. And the simple reason is, if you've ever sang along to a song in your car, you know that it's easier to be on pitch and like have a correct intonation if you sing along with somebody else. It's easier to hit the right notes if you have a guide track guiding you than it is to just sing to something that is just an instrumental. And so if your own vocals that you hear while you're recording are being corrected, you will automatically adjust your actual singing to what you hear in the headphones. So you will sing more in tune, more in many cases, if you hear a tiny bit of correction in your monitors. So this is kind of an advanced move, but you can try it if you're struggling with intonation. And then you can also guide vocalists through the session in different ways. So for example, if they tend to be too quiet, you can just turn down the volume of the vocals in the headphones and they will sing louder because they want to hear themselves better. Or if they are too loud, you can turn up the volume more in the headphones, which will often make them sing quieter. So you can also use that to guide the performance a little bit. Cool. Speaking of Ken Lewis and this workshop he did for our coaching members, he talked about the next point here as well, about vibe. Just the feel during the recording session. Another thing that makes artists feel a certain way. Very, very important if you want to get emotional takes out of yourself or someone else. Set up the room in a way that it's actually fun, or not just fun, that it creates the right environment for the emotions that you want to get across. So in the case of Ken Lewis, he had this projectors in his studio, like multiple, I think, where he creates this like 360 degrees projection on the walls, on the absorbers around the artist, where he can project a movie or a certain scenery, certain images, certain colors to the walls so that the artist would feel a certain way during performances, which I found was genius. It looked spectacular, and I can totally imagine how artists feel when they're immersed with like a certain scenery. He talked a lot about that as well. I've never went that far, but I definitely had situations where someone wanted candles and no electric light, or somebody wanted a brighter light or a darker light or whatever. So I have different kinds of lighting in my studio that I could use for that. And it just makes a difference. And that is true for the overall vibe of the session. Whatever you need, talk to your bandmates, listen to yourself, do whatever you can to make you feel good during the session, and you'll perform better. I don't know, any good examples of that you've used, Manel, or have all the artists been pretty much, didn't care about that?
Well, what I normally do is I normally have a little bit of a talk before the first time that I hit record.
Before you start your lovely process?
Yes.
It's the first part of the lovely process.
It's part of the lovely process. And I just talk with them about the song, like what is this about? And I invite them to think about it while singing it. Like, I try to get them in the zone. If I feel that they are people who would appreciate something like that, right? Because sometimes, every artist is different. And I always ask before they come to the studio, they normally have to fill in a form. And in that form, I ask them about what kind of milk they like to drink, or coffee, or tea, and also about, I don't know if it's the right English word, but incense, like this thing that you can light. Incense,
yeah. Smell.
Yeah, the smelly, lovely. I love it, but some people hate it for some reason.
Yeah.
So I always ask, and normally they like it, and so I have it ready when they come. It's, part of the vibe. So
yeah,
and also the lighting. I take care of the lighting when they come. Like, I try to make it cozy and
yeah. So it matters. Yeah, definitely. Cool. And then the final point here before we wrap it up is just so you make sure that you don't skip anything important and you don't have to interrupt the flow of the session, have basic checklists in place, like a pre-flight checklist that a pilot would go through before they take off. Have something like that for your session as well. And this can include like very stupid, simple things like, do you have enough adapters for the cables or whatever? Do you have simple things like, do you have toilet paper and drinks and snacks and whatever? Like anything you would need, because once you're in the flow of the session and you're in it and it's creative and the creative juices are flowing, and then you don't, and then all of a sudden you run out of something essential, you have to interrupt everything and somebody needs to go and get something. And so just make sure you have everything you need, make sure everything works, make sure you've double checked everything. So just make sure you have an uninterrupted, creative, cool experience during your session, and just build your checklist over time. Just go through it at the beginning and know that everything works. It's like very simple, and you will know what kind of things should be on this list for you. But I've forgotten like super obvious simple things many times before I started using checklists, and it's just a professional, like if you're working with others, it's a professional way to do things. And if you work with yourself, it still makes sense because you won't get annoyed at yourself for forgetting something simple. So just have a basic sort of checklist. That also includes things like double checking the sample rate of the session. Maybe you've used a different program in between and the sample rate has changed and you didn't notice. Or maybe whatever technical thing you need to double check. Maybe you used a compressor that you recorded through, but now you want it only for the monitoring and you forget that it's still on, and then you record through the compression and it was not intentional, or whatever. Like things like that. Just double check your signal chain, adapters, cables, anything like that, settings, supplies, things you would need during the session, and ideally do that a bit in advance of the session so you can still do something about it, and then just go. And the more you do this whole process that we outlined here, the faster, the more intuitive it will become. You'll learn your go-to techniques for certain things. You won't have to do everything all over again every single time, especially if you work on your own music. Then it's not going to be different every single time as much. But it is very, very important. And once you've done it, if you just try it once, I promise you, now you might think it's so tedious, so much work. I don't want to go through all of this when I just want to record. But I promise you, if you do it once, you'll notice, and you do it properly, you'll notice the difference, and you'll be so excited about the results you're getting at the source that you won't question it in the future, and you will just do it. Maybe not all of it. Maybe you can skip one or two things because they don't matter to you. Maybe you are just writing most of the time and it's not really the final recording, whatever. But like, give it a try. Listen to the results and then make a decision if you want to keep doing that or not, because you're going to get very different results and mixing is going to be a lot easier. All right. So I said it a couple times during this episode. If you want to get help with any of that, all of it, any of it, figure out a good process for you, figure out all those things, the mic positions, room setup, placement, drum gear, guitar gear, all of those things. If you don't want to figure that stuff out yourself and you want to know what's right for your situation, you can always go to theselfrecordingband.com/coaching, apply for coaching. We'll jump on a free call with you, create a plan for you where we include all of these things and figure out what is right for you. And then if you agree to that plan and you think it sounds awesome, we can implement it together and walk you through in our coaching. And if you think, oh no, I can do this myself, I don't need you, then we part ways and you keep doing it yourself. No harm. But like inside of our coaching program, we give you all the resources and every advantage we can give you so you make the best possible decisions and get the best possible results. And if you say, I don't want to do any of that shit on my own, I want someone else to do that for me because I just want to sing or play, whatever, and that's just too much for me, go hire Manel. He's an amazing producer and he'll take care of all these things and make sure you don't cut corners and you can just sing and perform and go through his lovely process. So in that case, go to manelitomusica.com and, contact Manel or hit him up on Instagram. I think you can do that as well. He's there pretty active.
Yes.
So you'll find all those things in the show notes. If you go to theselfrecordingband.com/301, this is the number of this episode. You'll find all the links where you find us. And with that, I thank you for listening and we'll see each other next week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.